Hey everybody, this is Mrs. Jennings. This is our screencast on the integumentary system, and I've got to get an overview of the integumentary system completed in less than 10 minutes. So I'm going to be talking fast. Remember, you can pause and rewind to take your notes. By the time you finish this screencast, you should be able to list the functions and the structures of the integumentary system. We will not be covering diseases in this screencast. I will be talking about that and a few other details in class. So, the integumentary system includes the skin and its accessory organs. 5 functions of the integumentary system I would like for you to know are listed on this screen. The first one being a protective covering. The integumentary system gives us a protection and a barrier to keep the outside environment from getting into the inside of our body. So a lot of the pathogens are kept from getting into the body. It also keeps us from losing water to the outside. Second function is sensory. We have special nerve receptors in our skin, 2 of which are called the Meissner and Pacinian corpuscles, and we'll be talking about that in a minute. The third function is excretion of waste. Our skin is able to release excess water and waste that we do not need. Fourth function is synthesizing, which means to make biochemicals, chemicals for life, one of those being vitamin D. Sunlight, when it hits your skin, it's able to convert a chemical to vitamin D, and vitamin D is needed by your bones and other things within your body, but especially the skeletal system is really important with needing vitamin D. And then the fifth function of the integumentary system is that it regulates our body temperature. It keeps us from overheating or losing too much heat, either way. It's able to do that through sweating to release heat, and then of course if we are losing too much heat, our body's muscles will shiver. The muscles that attached to our hair follicles will contract and we'll get the goosebumps. But our body is able to release 80% of our heat through our skin. And there is enough heat released in the skin in a hot, humid day that you could actually boil 20 quarts of water with that heat. That's a lot of heat. Okay, so let's go on to the structures of the integumentary system and get an overview of that. You'll notice skin and accessory structures are the 2 main parts of the integumentary system. The skin is also called a cutaneous membrane. It is divided into the epidermis and the dermis. The hypodermis is below that. It's not truly considered part of the skin, but we do usually talk about it when we talk about the epidermis and the dermis, because the hypodermis is the deepest, and down here it is where the epidermis and dermis is actually attached. The epidermis is made up of 5 layers within this area, and it is the most superficial of the layers of the skin. The dermis is also called the true skin, and it is made up of this thick area of connective tissue and accessory structures that's below the epidermis. Of the accessory structures, we have the hair, the nails, the glands, and the different sensory structures. So moving to this slide, you'll see I have just the epidermis. This is all the epidermis in an image. The very bottom layer of the epidermis, I told you it was composed of 5 layers. The deepest layer is called the basal layer, and the basal layer is where mitosis occurs. New cells are born, and as those new cells grow and develop, they're going to move to this direction until they're finally slothed off on the surface of the skin. So the next layer, as these cells move up and they mature, is the stratum spinosum. And strata or stratum just means layer. And here, this layer, one of the big functions is producing of keratin. Keratin is that protein that gives us a protection, a hardening of the cells and a protection for our body, as the cells out here are going to have more of a barrier to keep things out. Then these cells move to the next layer, and here they start dying, and it's called the stratum granulosum. The stratum granulosum. Now the stratum lucidum is the next layer, and you only see that on thick skin. That would be the palms of your hands or the soles of your feet. So found only on thick skin. And then the final top layer is where the dead keratinized cells are, called the stratum corneum. Those are the 5 layers of the epidermis. In that epidermis, you have 3 types of cells that are important to know: melanocytes, keratinocytes, and Langerhans. The melanocytes are seen in this image, and they are what the cells that produce these little dots called melanin. Melanin is a pigment that gives you color to your skin. You will increase activity with melanocytes when UV light from the sun hits it. So that increase in this pigment is what causes the tanning of the skin. It's there for the purpose of protecting the DNA to keep skin cancer from occurring. And then another cell in the epidermis is the keratinocyte. Keratinocyte, remember CYT means cell. It's a cell that produces keratin. Keratin is that protein that we've talked about in the past. And then Langerhans. This one area here that I drew is supposed to be a Langerhans cell. And the Langerhans cells are part of the immune system, able to capture any foreign invaders that get into our skin. And then moving on deeper, underneath the epidermis is the dermis. And the dermis is composed of 2 layers, the papillary and the reticular. The papillary is this area here formed by connective tissue and having these little ridges. These ridges here is what produce all these different ridges on the skin and the fingerprints. So the papillary layer is where you'll get your fingerprints. And then the rest of this deeper layer of the dermis is called reticular, and it's made up of connective tissue and accessory structures. And then of our accessory structures of the skin, we have the hair, the nails, the glands, and the sensory receptors. The hair is composed of 2 parts. It sits in this hair follicle, and these cells are producing new cells through mitosis. So you've got your hair root, that's the root, and then you have your hair that's outside beyond the surface called the shaft. And these are made up of dead keratinized epithelial cells. Then the nails are produced in the same way. There's a nail bed under here that produces cells through mitosis. They then travel up, they die and get keratin replacing the cytoplasm. And so there's a lot of keratin in this nail plate, and that's what makes it so hard. And then we have 3 types of glands in our skin. The sebaceous glands, as you see here, produce oil, and they release that oil through a hair follicle. If that oil and the cells that rupture producing that oil get trapped here, sometimes an infection can occur, and that produces a little pimple. You also have 2 types of sudoriferous. Here's one type. It is a sweat gland that produces a real clear liquid, and that is called an eccrine sudoriferous gland. Now in our axilla, our armpit region, we also have sudoriferous glands, but those sudoriferous glands produce a thicker type of substance, and we call those apocrine sudoriferous glands. And then we have the glands in our ears that produce earwax, and those are called ceruminous glands. Now, as far as our sensory receptors go, the 2 I want you to focus on are Meissner's and Pacinian. Meissner gives you the ability to feel light touch, like a feather touching your skin, and Pacinian are deeper in the dermis, and they give you the ability for deep pressure. Of course, you do have the ability to sense heat from cold with our thermoreceptors, and then you have nerve endings that are able to receive pain, as you can see here in this image with the needle sticking in the skin. So that's a hopefully less than 10-minute screencast on the skin, its functions, and its structures. Be sure to take the WISC, which should be below the screencast on the blog site, and be ready for a quiz on material in this class, on this screencast tomorrow in class. Remember that any grades on these quizzes below 80 requires repeat quizzes. And I'd like to give a shout out to Forrest for knowing the 4 characteristics of animal cells. See you guys tomorrow.